Who hasn't heard of the flood and Noah's Ark? It's one of the most iconic stories of the Bible, but it's also one that's often dismissed as a silly children's tale, at best a delightful myth or a pious legend. Was there actually a worldwide flood? How does God's covenant with Noah advance salvation history? And what can we learn from it today? Shalom and welcome to God's Story, Our Story, Catholics for Israel's online Bible course. I'm Dr. Andrei Villeneuve. Last time we looked at Genesis 3 and 4, the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the entrance of sin, suffering, and death in human history. It's one of our most important lessons, so be sure to watch it if you haven't yet. We saw how since that moment human life has been profoundly wounded by original sin. Indeed, today we're going to look at how the gradual corruption of humanity led to its first great universal judgment in the flood, which is a type of decreation of the world. Fortunately, God is going to save a remnant in Noah and his family, and through them will form a new creation. Before we begin, as always, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, and post your questions and comments below. The flood, covenant with Noah, and birth of the nations. Genesis 5 to 11. Last time we saw the state of the human soul after the fall and how Adam and Eve lost the divine sonship that God had given them. We looked carefully at the words of the serpent, how the serpent said to Eve, "Did God really say?" thereby undermining the truth of God's word. He also said, "You will not surely die," lying about the life that God had promised to give them. He also said, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil," thereby proposing another way than that of following God's commandments. And we know how the story goes. By listening to the serpent, by disobeying God, what happened to Adam and Eve? Well, they lost sight of the truth by which they should live. Their clear intellect and their understanding and their knowledge of the realities of the world and of God and of themselves gave way to a darkened intellect and to ignorance, so that they lost the prophetic role that God had given them. They lost sight of the natural theology by which they should live, knowing God and knowing themselves. By believing the serpent's lie about life, their well-ordered life, and in fact their immortality, now gave way to disordered passions, to loss of control over themselves, and to suffering and death. So much for them carrying out their priestly role of mediating God's life into the world. They also lost sight of natural worship, of the natural way of worshiping God and of remaining in relationship with Him. By believing the serpent's lie about another way of trying to be like God, knowing good and evil, indeed Adam and Eve lost their way, and their well-ordered soul gave way to a weakened will and to disobedience. And so for sure they lost their royal role, their kingly role of acting as kings, ruling over creation and even ruling over themselves. So clearly they lost sight of the natural law by which they would live. That is not good, the state of the human soul after the fall. Fortunately, as we said last time, God sets out to restore the human family, really through the rest of Scripture and up to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in the New Testament. The generations of Adam. We also saw last time how Cain murdered Abel, and this led to the banishment of Cain. And we began to see this line of Cain, this wicked line of Cain going down through Enoch, Irad, Mehujael, Methushael, and then Lamech, who was the first polygamist and who had 4 children. But then in Genesis 4, we also hear that Adam and Eve have a third son, and that's going to be Seth. And through him, the seed of the woman, remember God promised that the seed of the woman would win this battle against the seed of the serpent. Well, the seed of the woman is going to go through the line of Seth, and that's why we need to keep our eyes very close on this line of Seth. And we know that through the birth of Seth's son, Enosh, the scriptures tell us that this was the beginning of covenant worship when people started to call upon the name of the Lord. So the line of Seth will be God's covenant family, the family of God, or to use St. Augustine's words, the city of God in contrast to the city of man. And we're going to see 10 generations from Adam down to the person of Noah. so that Noah will be a type of new Adam, just like Adam had three sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth. We're going to see how Noah has three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And through the line of Seth down to Noah, God will continue to advance salvation history. In chapter 6 of Genesis, we see the corruption of the earth. We're told that these mysterious sons of God marry daughters of men, and they give birth to the Giborim in the first 4 verses of chapter 6. Who are these sons of God? Well, some say that they might be angels, and so we have a lot of early Jewish texts that hold this position. Of course, that's a bit problematic, because how can angels who are purely spiritual beings, how can they have relations with women, daughters of men, and how can they conceive from angelic beings to humans? Others say that these sons of God may have been sons of kings or princes and judges, but the prevalent interpretation in Christian history has been that the sons of God are the sons of Seth. In other words, the line of God, the divine line of God through whom the seed of the woman would pass. And so through this family of God, we see the sons or descendants of Seth who intermarry with the daughters of men, meaning daughters from the line of Cain. And this led to the great corruption of the human family. So in this context, we see God who limits the human lifespan to 120 years. Jewish tradition says that this was basically a warning that humans had 120 years to repent until the flood would come. We're told about the Nephilim who were there on earth at that time, and we're told about the birth of these Giborim, these giants of sorts, who were clearly wicked and who contributed to the corruption of the earth. So in this light, given this gradual degradation of the morality of humanity, God announces a coming global judgment in the flood. You can read about that in Genesis 6, verses 5 to 7. And as we're going to see, this flood is going to constitute a reversal of creation. We're going to see much of the same language used in creation that's going to be taken up and reframed as a new creation through the flood. Here's this passage from Genesis 6, verses 5 to 7. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Right there you can hear the language of creation. When you read about man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, that's exactly the language of the living beings who are created in Genesis chapter 1. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So thanks to Noah's righteousness, he's going to constitute this faithful remnant who will further salvation history in the midst of this great reset, so to speak, this wiping out of the entire human family due to their wickedness. The fact that God limits the lifespan of humans to 120 years, we see in the rapid reduction in the lifespan of the patriarchs. Here on the screen, you can see the very long lifespan of these early patriarchs. Adam, who lived some 930 years, and many of the first patriarchs lived over 900 years. And beginning with the flood, you can see a radical reduction of their life expectancy here, with Shem, Arpachshad, and Shelah, and the others, until by the time we get to Abraham, their lifespan is about 175 years old, which is still much longer than ours, but much shorter than it was in the very beginning. The generations of Noah. We're in Genesis 6, verses 9 and 10. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So the scriptures emphasize Noah's righteousness, and it gives us already the spoiler about these 3 sons who, of course, will be the founding fathers of the human family after the flood. We're told again that the earth is greatly corrupt and filled with violence, and that is going to unleash God's judgment. And so here it is announced in verses 13 to 17. God commands Noah to build this massive ark and tells him that he's going to have to bring some of the animals, and so a pair of each animal, and in fact 7 pairs of clean animals, we're told a little bit later. And God announces already ahead that he will form a covenant with Noah after this judgment of the flood comes about. And so here we go with the second great covenant of salvation history, whereas the covenant with Adam was merely a husband of a marriage, and that was sealed with the Sabbath. Now Noah will be the father of a household, and this covenant will be marked with the sign of the rainbow. So the father pledged to Noah to keep him and his household safe through the flood, and then promised never to wipe out the human family that way again. So here we go with the second covenant in salvation history. We're in Genesis 7. God commands Noah to enter the ark with 7 pairs of clean animals, and some of these animals he will sacrifice to the Lord after the flood. They enter the ark, Noah, his family, so Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives, so 8 people in total, 7 days before the flood. And here we go. It begins to rain. We're told that the fountains of the great deep burst forth. So it sounds like there was some underground water that burst forth, increased with the rains, and it rains for 40 days. We're given the details of that in chapter 7, verses 10 to 17, so that the waters even cover the highest mountains, according to verses 18 to 20. We're told that all the animals and all men died on the face of the earth. And so truly this was the end of the first world, the end of all humanity due to their wickedness. The waters prevail on the earth for 150 days, and that's going to lead to, after this long time, to the end of the flood and to this new creation. So here we're seeing this episode of a decreation followed by a new creation. Of course, the question that you're all burning to ask is, did all of this happen? Is it really possible that there was a global, worldwide flood that covered the entire earth? Well, we know that there are many ancient accounts of a worldwide flood, many such ancient accounts from, in fact, all over the world. So we have texts such as the Sumerian story of Ziusudra or Eridogenesis, we have the Epic of Atrahasis, and most famously the Epic of Gilgamesh that relates really a story of a very similar judgment of mankind through a massive flood that kills all people, and there's only a small kernel of survivors. There's also Greek accounts, Ovid, Hyginus, Apollodorus, and others. So you can see here on the screen that there is quite a number of universal flood traditions from all over the world, from Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, Syria, Greece, Egypt, Italy, Lithuania, Russia. What else have we got? Peru, even in the Fiji Islands and Hawaii. So every little square or rectangle you see here shows a point in common with the biblical account. And so we see a man in transgression. You see several of them have that. Divine destruction, one favored family, an ark is provided. The world is destroyed by water. We have some humans who are saved. Some animals are saved. Universal destruction, the ark lands on mountain. Birds are sent out, even survivors worship the divinities, and there is divine favor upon the saved. So we can see really a lot of common points in all these accounts. And here is a small sample of those, especially from the ancient Near East. So here's Atrahasis and Gilgamesh. We can see there is a revolt of sorts and some kind of evil or disturbance that leads to a judgment of the world. A certain hero, he's called various names. In Gilgamesh, he's called Utnapishtim. And we see a divine destroyer who gives a warning. The reason for the flood would be either sin or excessive noise, according to some of those accounts. And the flood is sent. In most of those accounts, the flood is much shorter, only 7 days. And in a couple of them, we see the survivor who sends birds from the boat or the ark. And very often the ark ends up on a mountain, and they have a fate of eternal life for many of them, but actually not Noah and his sons. So we see these universal flood traditions. So what does it mean? Does it mean that some texts copied others? That's what many scholars propose. But other scholars say, well, maybe there actually was a global flood, and basically most cultures of the world have some recollection of this flood that they all experienced or that their ancestors experienced. Now, in modern times, many scholars have proposed, well, maybe it was just a local flood. It seems pretty far-fetched to say that the entire world was covered with water, let alone of the highest mountain peaks that were covered with waters. So many say, well, it may have been some relatively large flood in the ancient Near East. We can say that, but we know that this creates some problems. For sure, the biblical text tells us that the waters prevailed 15 cubits upward and the mountains were covered. So it does sound like the entire world was covered. Moreover, if the flood was local, it does create a number of theological problems. Why did Noah have to build an ark if it was just a local flood? Why did God send the animals to the ark so they would escape death? The animals could have easily survived in other areas of the world. Why was the ark big enough to hold all kinds of land vertebrate animals? They would have been found elsewhere. They would have survived a local flood. Why would birds even have been sent on board? Birds would have easily escaped a local flood. How could the waters rise to 15 cubits above the mountains, above some mountains, without covering the rest of the land on earth? So that seems really strange. And people who did not live in the vicinity would have escaped God's judgment. It would have been relatively easy for people to escape the region and to go find refuge somewhere else in the world. Also, very significantly, God would have repeatedly broken his promise never to send a flood again, because we know there have been many floods ever since. Even in modern times, we have tsunamis, we have hurricanes, we have floods in our own nation probably this year. And so we know that theologically, God's solemn promise that he will never destroy mankind with a flood again would have been repeatedly violated. So here I'm just looking at some of the biblical and theological problems that are caused by positing a local flood. Some state that there's actually geological evidence for a global flood. I will not go into the fine details here, but you can look that up on websites such as Answers in Genesis. And so what are these alleged pieces of evidence for an ancient flood? Some say there are fossils of sea creatures high above the sea level, including, for example, the Grand Canyon. Some see rapid burial of plants and animals all over the place. Some have claimed to find rapidly deposited sediment layers that are spread across vast areas, even across continents. Sediment has been transported long distances, and a massive flood would be necessary to do that. They speak of rapid or no erosion between strata, and they also speak of many strata laid down in rapid succession. So these are really, in a nutshell, some of these arguments that are proposed to say that actually we do find evidence that much of the world at some point or another had been underwater. And just a fun picture here, you can see some whale fossils in the middle of the desert. So the curious case of the ancient whale bones, a trove of fossils in the Atacama Desert, may hold lessons about the plight of modern whales. And so very interesting. What are these whale fossils doing in the middle of the desert in Chile? And so just a fun fact that when we look at the fossil record, there are a lot of things that are unexplained by the world as we know today. Another significant question is the question of the ark. Is this even possible? I started off today by raising the question, is this not the stuff of legends, this whole narrative of the flood and the ark of Noah? And so, according to the biblical account of Genesis, the ark would have been 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So if a cubit is about 18 inches long, we're talking about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high approximately. So the ark would have been about the length of 2 Boeing 747s. How big was it? Here it is compared to an aircraft carrier. So it looks like about 2/3 of the size of a modern aircraft carrier. Here we see it next to a modern cruise liner of sorts. And so it would have been a massive ship nearing the limit of what is possible to do in terms of building a large wooden ship. Could the ark hold all the animals? That too seems pretty far-fetched, doesn't it? Well, if we look at the dimensions that are described in Genesis, the total floor space on the ark would have been over 100,000 square feet. That is more floor space than 20 basketball courts. The total cubic volume would have been about 1.5 million cubic feet, or 462,000 cubic meters. That is about 569 modern railroad stock cars. Well, we know that there are a lot of species of animals in the world, some 1 million or so, but obviously most can survive in water, such as fish, mollusks, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, worms, insects, and so on. So not a problem to take care of those. And really no more than 35,000 animals needed to go on the ark, with possibly as few as 2,000. We know that the average animal is about the size of a sheep, and so even 50,000 animals of that size would have filled only 30% of the ark. All this to say that it still would have required a miracle of sorts for God to gather up a pair of each species of animal. And of course, we're looking at a divine act, but all this to say that it is not as utterly impossible and ridiculous as it seems. If you would think of hundreds of thousands or millions of species, no, we're actually just talking about a few thousands. And so physically it would have been possible for a few thousand couples of animals to fit on the ark. And here we have an interesting depiction of the 3 floors of the ark and how there would have been plenty of room for quite a large crowd of animals. Has anyone ever found the ark? Well, some have claimed that they have. This is, of course, disputed. Genesis 8:4 tells us that the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat in eastern Turkey. And so have the remains of Noah's ark been found? Some have claimed that they have. A giant boat-like form was found near Mount Ararat in Turkey. It's known as the Durupinar site. You can see it on this picture. It looks kind of like the shape of a boat. As early as 1960, Life magazine published this report of this boat-sized shape on Mount Ararat. And of course, others contest it. Some say that it's not really legitimate, but here you can see this picture where it does look kind of like the shape of a boat. And you can see its location here, Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. So all this to say, we don't know they found Noah's Ark. It's not necessarily this, what you're looking on the screen, but all this to say that some have claimed to discover some remains of the Ark. Let's go back to our biblical text. The waters abate. We are in Genesis chapter 8, and we're told that God remembered Noah. God remembered the covenant that he promised to Noah. He remembered Noah's righteousness. And so the waters recede, and the ark indeed rests on Mount Ararat on the 17th day of the 7th month. The waters continue to abate, and now Noah sends a raven and then a dove 3 times. The first time the dove returns, does not find land. The second time it comes back with an olive branch, and the third time it does not return, meaning that the dove has found some dry ground. The waters dry off the earth, and this is the end of this ordeal. After more than 1 year upon the waters, God commands Noah to exit the ark, and it's going to be the moment to make a covenant with Noah. Soon after he gets off the ark, Noah builds an altar and offers sacrifices to God with the clean animals that he had taken with him upon the ark. And following this sacrifice, God promises to never again curse the ground with a global flood like he had just done. And so there are words of comfort. We have the institution of days and seasons at the end of chapter 8. And God begins chapter 9 of Genesis with a divine blessing, and he gives them what later in Jewish tradition has become known as the Noahide laws, or the laws of the sons of Noah. So look at these first 2 verses of chapter 9 of Genesis. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Do you recognize this language? "And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, and every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand." Note here the language of creation. God blessed, as God had blessed the Sabbath at the conclusion of creation. And he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply," exactly the same commandment that God had given to Adam and Eve, and fill the earth. Originally, Adam and Eve had dominion over the animals. Now we're told the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. It's not exactly dominion now, because now we're in a fallen world. So we're talking about a type of alienation between man and beast here, because man will inspire fear and dread upon every beast of the earth. So what are these 7 Noahide laws? They are really hinted at in the biblical text. So this would be an institution of 7 Noahide laws, or a set of moral laws for the children of Noah, or all of mankind, intuited, implicit in Genesis 9, 1-7, and spelt out in Jewish oral tradition. So this is from the Talmud, here this quote, the Talmud being the most important text in Jewish oral law or Jewish oral tradition. And the Talmud says the children of Noah were commanded with 7 commandments: to establish laws or to set up courts of laws, to prohibit cursing God, idolatry, illicit sexuality, bloodshed, robbery, and eating flesh from a living animal. So this, according to Jewish tradition, would be the essential laws given to all of humanity: prohibition of idolatry, prohibition of murder, of theft, of sexual immorality, of blasphemy, prohibition of eating flesh taken from an animal while still alive, and establishing courts of law. So from just the very few commandments that God gave to Adam and Eve, he's beginning to expand his commandments. Now there are 7 commandments given to Noah and his sons, or a new way that they are to live in following God's commandments. So what is this narrative of the flood? We already said that this flood is a type of decreation, but it's also a new creation. So how does God recreate God's family? We're going to see a new world emerging from the waters of the deep. The same word, deep or tehom, that we read in Hebrew in Genesis 1 verse 2. The deep out of which the world was created. Now he's going to create a new world from the waters of the deep. We have the symbolism of 7. Remember, the world was created in 6 days plus 1, the Sabbath, so 7 days. Now, in the whole account of the flood, we keep hearing about 7. The rest of the 7th day of creation is matched by even the name Noah, which means rest in Hebrew. We're going to see 7 pairs of clean animals. The ark came to rest on Mount Ararat in the 7th month. Noah sent a raven and dove at intervals of 7 days. And then we're told God blessed, just as he had blessed the first creation. God tells Noah and his sons and their wives, be fruitful and multiply, just as he had commanded Adam and Eve. And then God gives Noah dominion over the beasts, just as he had given Adam and Eve dominion over the beasts. We're told that food is given for man. Now they are allowed to eat meat for the first time, but no shedding of blood, especially not the shedding of blood of humans. So here you can look in greater detail all these parallels between creation and the flood. From the first Adam to Noah, who acts as a second Adam, humanity is created, then humanity is wiped out. We see a classification of the animals. Everything begins from the deep, just as the flood is the deep that is released upon the earth. A splitting of waters, and so the splitting of water from dry land at creation, now the reuniting of the waters. Then we hear of this spirit that begins to blow at creation. We know that the word ruach in Hebrew means both wind and spirit. And so in the very beginning of creation, the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And in Genesis 8 verse 1, we're told that God sent a wind or a spirit above the waters to begin this new creation. We see the emergence of dry land, of plants, of animals and man, the rhythm of nature and seasons, the provisioning of food, and then a divine blessing. And both Adam and Noah have 3 sons. So clearly we see some pretty cool correlation here between the creation of the world and the covenant with Adam and the new creation under Noah. So what about this renewed covenant? What does that look like? Here is the Lord speaking in Genesis 9 verses 9 to 13. And what does he say? And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. God establishes his covenant with Noah. It's a renewal of the creation covenant, and now the sign of this renewed covenant is the rainbow. What is God doing here? Here's the triangle that we've seen before. As he establishes the Noahide covenant, he's restoring a little bit of the way, the truth, and the life that Adam had lost in the Garden of Eden. We know that by making a covenant, he reveals the truth of his love for Noah. And so Noah plays in a certain way a prophetic role who receives God's promises, the word of truth of God. Noah offers sacrifice after the flood, and so he plays a priestly role who's going to mediate God's life to his children. And also by receiving God's laws, the Noahide laws, Noah is given the way by which he should live, and he plays a royal role, a kingly role here in following the way that God has revealed to him. So we see a bit of a restoration of the way, the truth, and the life through the three offices of prophetic, priestly, and royal here in this covenant made with Noah. If you look at the literary structure of the flood narrative, this is very cool. You can see that there is a method to the madness. And so from the first naming of Noah, the naming of his three sons, the building of the ark, we can see a certain pattern, the 7 days of waiting for the flood twice, and then entering the ark, the waters increase, 150 days, the waters prevail, and then God remembers Noah. And then we backtrack with everything else. 150 days, the waters abate, the mountaintops become visible. 40 days, then he opens the window, waits 7 days to send the birds, waiting for the waters to subside. Again, 7 days, leaving the ark, and then no flood in the future, and we go back to the mention of Noah. So really a beautiful literary structure here in this flood narrative. If you want to follow the chronology of the flood, you can study this slide, which gives you the rundown of all the various days. And as you can see, the flood lasted just a little over 1 year, 371 days by some accounts. We're still in Genesis chapter 9. And so after the flood, we're told that Noah had 3 sons. As we know, they were on the ark with him, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But following this new divine initiative of forming this new covenant with Noah, we're going to see a renewed human failure, even with Noah, the righteous man. And so we're told that Noah plants a vineyard and becomes drunk, basically passes out in his tent. And then we're told that Ham came in and saw the nakedness of his father. So what does this mean? Did he just look at Noah inappropriately and that's it? And he kind of mocked his father? Some say that this language of seeing the nakedness of someone, it reflects the language of Leviticus, which actually points to incest. And so some ancient commentators say that this could have been maternal incest. Ham, who maybe slept with his own mother or even raped his father, did something like that. So some terrible deed was committed here, possibly even conceiving the son of Ham, Canaan. And we know how Canaan will play an important role in the rest of salvation history. Shem and Japheth, in contrast, act respectfully towards Noah, and they cover him, walking backwards to not even look at him. And so as Noah wakes up, he curses the son of Ham, Canaan. So we don't know if this was a year after the flood. We're not sure if Canaan was even conceived at this point, or if this is kind of a delayed reaction. But in any case, we're told that Noah curses Canaan, the son of Ham, and he blesses Shem and Japheth. We know that Shem will be the ancestor, eventually, of the chosen people, of the Hebrew people. From Shem, we have the term Semites. And so all the Semitic people are descendants of Shem. And so this points to the future subjugation of Canaan by Israel. We're told about the origins of Canaan, possibly born out of incest, out of this very inappropriate act, and this curse of their origins that's going to be reflected in the later history of the Canaanites. So here's Noah saying, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren." That's the end of Noah's life at the end of chapter 9. And so as we conclude the study of his life, we can look at Noah's kind of original sin, which reflects a lot of the language that we saw in the first original sin in chapter 3. So look at the correlations here. We see in the very beginning in chapter 2, the Lord planted a garden in Eden where he put the man, and now Noah planted a vineyard. Eve took of the fruit of the tree and ate, gave it to her husband, and now Noah drinks the fruit of the vine and becomes drunk. They knew they were naked. Now Noah becomes uncovered or naked in his tent. They made loincloths, and now Shem and Japheth cover the nakedness of their father. The eyes of both were opened. They knew they were naked. Now Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. The sin of Adam and Eve ends with a curse, cursing the serpent, cursing the earth, and now we see Noah cursing Canaan. So clearly there's a parallel here between the fall of Adam and Eve and the fall of Noah, so to speak. How is the story of Noah relevant for us in our own days? Well, we know that Jesus referred to Noah and took the story of Noah as a warning. So here are the words of Jesus in Matthew 24 in his eschatological discourse, or discourse about the end of days. So Jesus says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen till the flood came and took them all away. So also will it be at the coming of the Son of Man." And so this type of obliviousness at the time of the flood, people engaging in their pleasures, in business, in pursuing gain, money, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, completely oblivious about the coming catastrophe, Jesus tells us, so it will be with the coming of the Son of Man. People are going to be oblivious, pursuing pleasure, power, money, whatever, until a new catastrophe comes upon the earth. So a very dire and sobering word of warning here on the part of Jesus. The Epistle to the Hebrews in the New Testament also says, "By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not seen yet, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith." So Noah was warned of things not yet seen. He was able to have a sense of what was to come, and so he was ready to be saved. He labored for the sake of his salvation. How much more should we labor for the sake of our salvation? Even if our life seems peaceful today, we know that it will not be. Judgment will come eventually. Other passages from the New Testament. Here's from the first epistle of Peter. The flood also points to a new creation, but also a future judgment. God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. So just as God waited patiently in the days of Noah, we talked about 120 years during the building of the ark, but only a few, 8 persons were saved. Now we are given new waters for salvation, whereas the waters of the flood were for the sake of death. Now we have water that is the waters of baptism, which the flood prefigured. These waters are able to save us now through the resurrection of Christ. And so if you're not baptized, this is a good cue for us to look into joining the family of God and being baptized. Here is the second epistle of Peter. First of all, you must understand this, that scoffers will come in the last days with scoffing, following their own passions and saying, "Where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all things have continued as they were from the beginning of creation." They deliberately ignored this fact that by the word of God, heavens existed long ago, and an earth formed out of water, and by means of water, through which the world that then existed was deluged with water and perished. But by the same word, the heavens and earth that now exist have been stored up for fire, being kept until the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. So I don't know how much of a consolation that is, that the Lord promised never to destroy the world through a flood again, because he says basically next time will be through fire. And so we know that these scoffers were there back in the days, and they still are with us today, scoffing that God is inactive, he does not see, he promised he would come, but he's not coming. And this type of assumption that the world just continues on and on as it was from the beginning of creation, but in fact the first world disappeared through the flood, and the world that we know today will also disappear. And so that too is a serious warning to us as we continue in this life. Baptism is a new creation. Just as the first creation began with water, God's Spirit moved over the water, and then God tells Adam, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." With the flood, we saw already a new creation, which was prepared with 40 days of rain. It began with water. God's Spirit or wind moves across the waters, and then God tells Noah, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Now with baptism, we see a new creation, the creation of our soul as we are redeemed in the Messiah, Yeshua, in Christ. We see a time of preparation, 40 days of fasting and penance during Lent. And then for those who are baptized on the Easter Vigil, Everyone's new life begins with water, and then God's Spirit comes to us through the water, and then Jesus tells us, go and make disciples of all nations. Go be fruitful and multiply spiritually by bringing others into the kingdom of God. We're in Genesis 10, and we're told about the 70 nations that emerged from the sons of Noah. The sons of Japheth, the sons of Ham, and the sons of Shem are all listed in this genealogical chapter 10. And from them, the whole world will be filled. We see generally the descendants of Shem, as we said, are the Semitic people. We find them especially here in the East, in the Middle East. The descendants of Ham are mostly those situated in Africa, and the descendants of Japheth more up here in modern-day Turkey and also in Europe. The birth of the nations who are born out of these three sons of Noah. And so they will form all the nations of which we hear about in the Bible. But then in chapter 11, we see yet another divine initiative followed by human failure and even human rebellion. So just as we saw Adam and Eve rebel against God in the garden, now we're going to see a global rising up of all humanity against God here at the Tower of Babel. So what do the people say? Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So they migrate to this land of Shinar in the east, which is basically Babylonia. And very often when we hear people migrating to the east, this denotes distance from God in those early chapters of Genesis. And so these people rise up against God, trying to make a name for themselves. Instead of exalting the name of the Lord and serving him, they want to exalt themselves. So we see an instance here of human pride rising up against God, trying to attain independence from God. What does the Lord do? God confuses their language. So whereas before they were all united with a common language, now he confuses their language and scatters them across the earth. And this word for confuse, which is lebalbel in Hebrew, from there we have the word Babel in English, or in Hebrew as well. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. And so this attempt to rise up against God ends up with the confusion of languages and the scattering across the earth. Is this mythology, this Tower of Babel? Well, we know that we have found similar structures in the ancient Near East, and these are known as ziggurats in ancient Mesopotamia. These were built by Sumerians, Babylonians, Akkadians, and Assyrians for their local religions and as places of worship for their gods. And here we see one partially reconstructed facade of the Neo-Sumerian Great Ziggurat of Ur near Nasiriyah in Iraq, so very close to Abraham's birthplace that we will study next time. Each ziggurat was part of a temple complex which included other buildings. And so the episode of the Tower of Babel is well attested by the ziggurats that we find in the ancient Near East. As we continue through chapter 11, we see a familiar picture. We saw in Genesis chapters 4 and 5, we saw a couple of lines. We saw the line of Cain that was interrupted and was basically wiped out by the flood, and then the line of Adam through Seth that led to Noah and his three sons. Now in Genesis 11, we see another 10 generations now going from Noah to the line of Shem and down through a man called Terah. And this man Terah will also have three sons named Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran will be the father of Lot. In contrast to that line, we see the line of Ham, Cush, and Nimrod, and of course Canaan. And that line is cursed and will meet its judgment at Babel and then later on in salvation history. So we see this second genealogy in Genesis 10 and 11 that sets the stage for the continuation of salvation history in Genesis 12. We see also a similar structure from creation to Noah. In these 10 generations, we see the creation, which is mirrored by the flood to this person of Abram, Creation mirrored by recreation. We talk about the deeps, about the blessing, the be fruitful and multiply, food. Adam worked the ground, Noah worked the ground. And then just as Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree, Noah does something very similar, eating, or rather drinking, the fruit of the vine, and then the nakedness as we talked about. Cain sinned and was cursed. Ham sinned and Canaan was cursed. We see genealogy in chapter 5 and in chapter 10, leading to the judgment of the sons of God in chapter 6. And then on the other side, we see the judgment of the generation of Babel. Then we see the flood and the scattering in chapter 11. And so the result is the undoing of creation with the flood, and then mirrored by the scattering of mankind at Babel. As we come to the end of chapter 11, we are introduced to this man, Terah, and his sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran fathers Lot, who will play a significant role next time when we meet. We're told that Haran died in Ur, and so Abram and Nahor take wives. Abram will be married to Sarai, who is barren. That's going to be a problem later on in his life. And Nahor marries Milcah. Now Terah takes Abram, Lot, and Sarai to a city called Haran, and there we are told that Terah dies. In fact, he died many years later. But this sets the stage for our next episode in salvation history. So here's the journey of Terah and Abram. They go up to Haran, and then next time we will see this man called Abram who will migrate down here to the land of Canaan. Here is once again our chart of the genealogies from Adam to Shem, to Noah and Shem, and then from Shem, as we saw, a reducing of the life expectancy of all people. And here we see this second genealogy from Noah and Shem down to Abram. That's the story of the flood, the covenant with Noah, the birth of the nations, their prideful rebellion against God at Babel, and their scattering throughout the earth. Next time, we will go from scattering to ingathering. We will see how God called one man to leave his homeland and move to the land of Canaan. Thanks to this man's obedience of faith, the Lord promised to make of him a great nation, a great name, and a worldwide blessing. Come and learn about the father of this new family and people of God, Abraham. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, and post your questions and comments below. I will see you next time. Peace and God bless.